I'm Linda Elsegood, founder of the LDN Research Trust. It has been my honour to interview LDN researchers, prescribers, pharmacists and patients from around the world for many conditions. Thank you for joining us. I'd like to introduce Dr. Igor Schwartzman from the United States. Thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Linda.
Could you tell me when you first heard about LDN?
Yes, I discovered LDN about around 2011. It was interesting. I discovered it through learning about a little bit more about small intestinal bacterial overgrowth, and it is a gastrointestinal condition that I come across quite a bit in my practice, largely because I have so many patients whom I treat for Hashimoto's thyroiditis, which is autoimmune hypothyroidism, and it just so happens that there's a large number of people who end up having SIBO in conjunction with Hashimoto's. And of course, small intestinal bacterial overgrowth is a condition, if you would, a gut flora imbalance that results in augmented and changes in gut motility. And so when we treat gut motility, bacterial overgrowth, the second phase of treatment is actually treating gut motility. And so LDN can be used as a prokinetic. Pro means for, kinesis means movement, in treating SIBO. So that's when I initially discovered it, and as I began to dive in deeper, I realized the value of it being used in autoimmune conditions. And of course, there are some research studies to support the fact that LDN can be used with autoimmune conditions as well as others. But that was my discovery, and I've been using it since.
Mm-hmm. What conditions would you say, other than those you've just already mentioned, have you used LDN for?
Well, I have a large portion of my patients are certainly, they're drawn to me because they have Hashimoto's thyroiditis, but I've had folks with multiple sclerosis and other autoimmune conditions that I'm using LDN for in conjunction with other modalities. And I don't generally draw too many folks who have many more conditions beyond the gastrointestinal disorders like irritable bowel disease and irritable bowel syndrome and Crohn's disease. And so those are certainly the most common ones in my practice, largely because of the emphasis of my clinical practice.
Mm-hmm. When you treat somebody with, say, some SIBO, for example, mm-hmm. What else do you recommend that people do at the same time?
Well, I look at SIBO as the therapeutic approach for me happens in stages. There's the initial stage of managing overgrowth, and the second phase is focusing on motility. So the first phase may involve herbal antibiotics, conventional antibiotics, fasting, appropriate diets. And then the second phase, which also involves certain herbal treatments and formulas, and as well as LDN, as I mentioned, for used as a prokinetic. But I always use, there's obviously diet is an important part, whether it's phase 2, whether it's phase 3, or ongoing. In fact, dietary intervention is the foundation of my clinical practice because food is medicine, and that's where it all begins. And so LDN is part of the treatment, but that's not in its entirety. And that goes the same goes for any other type of health condition or health issue that the person's presenting with.
What kind of a diet would you recommend that people take?
That's a difficult question to answer in a few sentences, largely because we know that people who have, at least in my experience, people who have gastrointestinal health issues or endocrine disorders or Hashimoto's thyroiditis and so on, they are generally having sensitivities, allergies to certain foods, and it becomes extremely individualized. Now, as a general rule, and if we were to, and there are no generalities in clinical practice, but let's just say, as a general practice, if we were to select a dietary intervention for someone who has SIBO, I blend specific carbohydrate diet with low FODMAPs, with the approach of using anti-inflammatory foods that are much less allergenic in nature. So it's a blend, and you could probably even extend that beyond someone with SIBO and beyond someone with any other type of gastrointestinal health issue into endocrine disorders and other areas. But it certainly is individualized, and the basis of my approach is usually let's minimize the allergens, work on healing the gut and the barriers and the mucosal membranes, and then slowly reintroduce the foods. And once the gut barriers are strengthened, generally speaking, of course it doesn't happen overnight, but generally speaking, people do much better with fewer reactions, with fewer sensitivities than when they first started.
Mm-hmm. In your experience, have you noticed any patients that when they first try LDN have any adverse effects?
Well, similar to what other colleagues and other clinicians I have heard speak, the most common, of course, is the vivid dreams. That's probably what I come across the most. Interestingly enough, more often, I know practitioners use it in the evening time, at that bedtime, and I certainly do that most of the time. But there are times when people cannot tolerate it and they certainly don't sleep as well, and I end up using it in the morning, and they seem to do better. So it's really case-by-case basis, but for the most part, I have not seen adverse reactions, if you would, other than the impact on sleep. And even in those instances, some people actually enjoy the vivid dreams, but certainly when the sleep is disrupted, we change up the regimen.
Mm-hmm. And how long would you say, if you had to be pushed to answer this question, it is before patients notice there is an improvement?
It's interesting. In some instances, the feedback I get is, wow, it's been a month and I feel dramatically different. I feel, and the most common feedback is sort of I wouldn't want to call it a euphoric feeling, but it's a sense of well-being that's improved. I have improved tolerance to stress or resistance to stress, and I just feel good. But it can be as soon as a month into it, and I don't know if it's psychosomatic, but I certainly have seen it with a number of folks where that seems to be the report, the feedback I get, so I have to believe it. And in some instances, it's actually, we've been doing it for a long time, and they're not really reporting a significant change, if you would. But I expect that to be the case where, 3 out of 4 people see a benefit and 1 out of 4 don't necessarily see any change.
Mm-hmm. How many patients do you think you've treated with LDN now?
85% of my practice have Hashimoto's thyroiditis. Virtually, probably 50% of them are on LDN currently, and it's so I can't give a distinct number, but it's a lot of people who are joining my practice, and I think it's there's also, interestingly enough, some people are coming in with that request, so I'm not even having to educate them in many ways. They have read, the most recent the LDN book, well familiar to you, and and of course they're finding websites about LDN. So the numbers are adding up quickly with that request.
So would you say 100 plus people, or?
Sure.
All right. Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that's good, and people obviously will be able to find you. Would you like to say how you can be contacted?
Oh, absolutely. Our clinic is Whole Family Wellness Center in Portland, Oregon. The phone number and the website the website is wholefamilywellnesscenter.com. You can always search for us, and I have patients reach out to me directly with phone calls and email, and of course the internet is the best way to find us. And I always love learning about other people's stories, and so I certainly welcome comments directly to the clinic.
We absolutely love doctors that prescribe LDN. We have so many requests every day from patients looking for an LDN experienced doctor, so that's very handy. Just as a side, did you know that the next conference is going to be in Portland, Oregon?
I sure did. I am very excited. I have already been planning, which is fantastic because it's in 2017. There's plenty of time to plan for it. So if I can be of any assistance, Linda, please do let me know.
And thank you for sharing your experience with us.
Yeah, absolutely, and I appreciate you as well, and for all the work that you put and the heart and soul that you put into bringing awareness to low-dose naltrexone.
Thank you.
Do you have LDN experience to share? If so, please email me, linda@ldnrt.org. I look forward to hearing from you.